Hi there, my name is Mark and this is my wife Janet.
Hi.
And we're Christian life coaches in Niagara Falls, and we just wanted to share some of our story about God's faithfulness through the storms of life.
You can probably tell from our accent that we're not from Canada, but we actually grew up and lived the majority of our lives in England, and we pastored a church in England for 7 years. And until we moved to Canada in 2005, apart from the fact that we had 5 children, our lives were pretty normal. But we moved here in 2005 with a 12-week-old, 4 other children, following the call of God. God had clearly spoken to us about moving to another country. We'd been called to lead a hurting church, and we knew that God had called us. However, the first couple of years were really, really difficult for me. I struggled with culture shock and adjustment, being away from family with a young family. And after 2 years, I got some help dealing with all the difficult things that I was struggling with. We got some help together as a couple, and it turned our lives around. However, 3 months later, my dad suddenly passed away from a treatment for cancer. And though rather than it being devastating to me, actually God had prepared me to deal with loss and grief, and I was able to navigate those waters fairly well. What was more challenging was that in a few months after my dad's passing, Mark became very, very ill with severe depression and anxiety. We weren't able to recognise it to start with, and it actually began with a super crazy high that then rapidly sank into a very, very low that was medication resistant, and it caused a lot of problems for our family. He struggled with that depression with the help of his leadership team. We were leading the church still at the time for 4 years, trying to figure out the medication that would work. But after 4 years, things got too much for him, and he ended up taking an overdose. This threw our family into even more crisis. Mark was in the hospital initially for 3 months, and then on and off for the next couple of years. So I had to find work, and in that place, God was faithful. He provided work for me at a local Christian school, and that really was a gift to us, more than just financially at the time. The doctors said that Mark would never work again, but I just could not believe that God would bring a family to a different place, following his call, giving everything that they had in surrender to him, and that he would just throw them on the rubbish dump. And so I fought the doctors, and sometimes I fought Mark, saying this cannot be God's will for your life. And eventually he actually got 3 days temporary work at a factory. That 3 days turned into 5 years, and it was God's rehabilitation program for him to begin to recover. His depression lasted for 7 years, and it took a long time for us to come out the other side, and we're still really in that process because it affected our family quite significantly as well. But we saw God's faithfulness through the journey, and although it was not easy, he was with us every step of the way.
Yeah, and it just reminds me of a well-known story in Mark chapter 4, where Jesus says to the disciples, let's go over to the other side. And they get in this boat and they go on their way. And then suddenly this furious storm arises that terrifies the disciples. And Jesus is asleep in the boat. And they wake him up and say, God, Jesus, don't you care? And storms come into our lives. They happen, and this was a furious storm for us. And as I came into this broken church and started pastoring, it was like a lot of the things in my own life that I'd run away from, traumas in my childhood, kind of just manifested themselves. And so in times of conflict, I found that I couldn't cope anymore. And things that I was able to cope at, even as a policeman when I was younger, suddenly these things were impossible for me. And one thing that I have learnt in life as I've learnt more about trauma and its effects on us is that life can seem very chaotic. It's like you are constantly afraid of what's going to happen next. And this was exactly what was going on in my life. And so in the face of just so much, so many storms, it seemed, hitting my life, I just kind of closed down, I shut off, and just kind of froze in life. And that's really how I began to treat these life experiences that are going on for me, and it just led me into a very bad place.
Yeah, these storms, they come at us from all angles, and often we can feel like the disciples felt, that Jesus didn't care about them. He was just sleeping. Maybe he'd forgotten them, and he wasn't interested in what they were going through. They were experienced fishermen. They knew how to navigate storms. It must have been a big one. One of the things that I learnt through the storms, and I will say that I rode those waves like a roller coaster and did not always do very well. But very early on in this journey, before we really knew that Mark was ill, but there was some behaviour that suggested he was heading that way. One of the things that God said to me was, we were actually in a worship service, and I had a picture of myself looking at Mark in this worship service, and I felt God cup my chin and draw it back to himself, and I felt him say, fix your eyes on Jesus. And through the next 7 years, he would just keep saying that to me, fix your eyes on Jesus. And that was really, really difficult, because my tendency was to look this way, and that if Mark was okay, I would be okay. If he wasn't okay, I wouldn't be okay. And that is very common with when you're trying to care for someone with mental illness. They're on this roller coaster, and you ride the roller coaster with them. But I learnt that the more I practiced fixing my eyes on Jesus, the more I was able to walk steadily on what felt like a tightrope, to be honest. And actually that was also good for Mark and our children. And as I said, I didn't always do very well. There were times when I didn't think I would make it. I learnt, probably not helpfully at the time, that 80% of marriages do not survive the sort of things that we were walking through. And there was one morning I was reading my Bible, and I just said, I wasn't even reading my Bible, I was just sitting with God saying, I can't do this anymore, and I need your help. And I think I'm depressed, and I think I'm going under in this storm too. And I opened my Bible, I just let it fall open, which was not my habit, but that morning I was pretty desperate. And it fell open to Psalm 46, which I knew well, but the verses that caught my eyes were, God is within her, she will not fall. And at that moment, I knew that that was the word of God for me, that he was saying to me, fix your eyes on me, I've got you. And it gave me the strength and the courage to do another day.
Yeah, and it wasn't like I was doing nothing during this time of depression. I was kind of going through this process of trying different drugs, and I was very drug resistant. And any of you who've had to and go on medication, you can know sometimes what a lottery it is to try and find a drug mix that works for you, that's going to actually bring you into some levels of normality. And so because that wasn't working very well, I didn't do very well in counselling, though I had it. I appreciated a Christian counsellor. Even in the public health system I was in, God was faithful. He brought me to this man, and he was such a good help for me, but it was so difficult for me to process all the damage and all the wrong thinking and everything that I had at that time. And the other thing that I really did was exercise. And it's funny because I exercised more when I was depressed than after I was depressed. I found it I just went on and got on and did it. And God's faithfulness, even in that time, I became a fitness instructor out of that. It was probably one of the most positive things for me out of that 7 years of depression. But God had said, in that story I referred to earlier, Jesus said, let us go to the other side. And our testimony is that in spite of this furious storm around us, we got to the other side. Jesus had said it to us, and before we came to Canada, someone had given us a word that God would take us to Canada where Mark will write songs. And she knew nothing of the invitation we'd had to come to Canada and our kind of praying about that. So it was a real confirmation. And we came to Canada, and then this storm emerged that was crazy. Almost, I lost my life. It was very difficult on our marriage, our family, the church, our friends. And yet we came through to a point where afterwards, many years later, as I was learning and being healed of the trauma of childhood and working through different issues, I began to write some songs.
Yeah, and as Mark referred to that word that somebody gave us, actually, God doesn't always tell us the whole story in advance. But God said, you will go to Canada and Mark will write songs. They missed off the middle bit that said, you will die for 7 years and then Mark will write songs. But our biggest takeaway, as Mark said, is that when God has a plan for your life, then he is faithful to accomplish that plan. And we have seen, we are living in his faithfulness. On the journey, we can forget that. We can miss the fact that he is with us. He's with us through the storms. He cares about us deeply in the storms. He also will use the storms to work in our lives. And we would both say that we're different people to the ones who moved to Canada 18 years ago. He's changed us as he's drawn us to himself, as he's healed our hearts. He's made us more like Jesus. And we just want to finish with one of the songs that Mark wrote. And this was a song that he wrote out of the trauma, out of the chaos that he was living in internally. And the invitation in this song is, no matter what the storm is, then we can bring our hearts to God and he will meet us in that place.
When chaos comes and surrounds me, fear rushes in like a flood. When anxious thoughts roll and torment me, overwhelmed, I'm overwhelmed again. Yet there's a voice of peace in the storm. The shepherd says, come, the pain can be gone. Chaos can cease and nightmares can flee. So unclench your heart and give it to me. Unclench your heart and give it to me. Beauty for ashes, broken hearts healed, traumas removed, captives set free. So unclench your heart and give it to me. Unclench your heart and give it to me. Rebellion's loud voice comes to rob me, when I feel no choice but to hear. When life's trials destroy all I loved here, I'm overwhelmed again. Yet there's a voice of peace in my soul. The shepherd says, come, the pain can be gone, chaos can cease and nightmares can flee. So unclench your heart and give it to me. Unclench your heart and give it to me. Beauty for ashes, broken hearts healed, darkness removed, captives set free. So unclench your heart and heart and fix your eyes on me. My child, give me your heart. My child, give me your heart and fix your eyes on me. My child, give me your heart and I'll set you free. My child, give me your heart and fix your eyes on me. My child, give me your heart and I'll set you free. Beauty for ashes, broken hearts heal, darkness removed, captives set free. So unclench your heart and give it to me. Unclench your heart and give it to me. So unclench your heart and give it to me. Unclench your heart and give it to me.
If you find yourself right in the midst of a storm that threatens to engulf you, whether either as a person struggling with mental health or as a caregiver, then God's invitation is always to bring our hearts to him, and he will meet us in that place and he will bring us safely to the other side.
And our prayer is that you would know God's faithfulness and that you would know that when he says, let us go to the other side, he will get you there.